Welcome. I'd like to call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting to order on Tuesday, October 10th, 2017. I'm Ruthina Malone, and I want to thank those in the audience as well as those watching on television tonight for joining us. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, we have Superintendent Steve Murley, Board of Directors Janet Godwin, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland, J.P. Clausen, Sean Eystone, Paul Russler, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comments, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. And first up on our agenda, we have the ICE update, and I see Co-President Brady is with us tonight.
Hi, President Malone, directors. I'm Brady Shutt on behalf of the Iowa City Education Association. It's nice to see all of the new faces up here after a lot of hard work in the campaign. I'd like to just extend a congratulations on behalf of ICEA for your election victories, and also just to thank you for all of the time that you put into the campaign and all the time that you're already putting into working on behalf of the teachers, staff, and students here in the district. We look forward to a great relationship. I felt really formed a really good relationship in the campaign process, and I was reminded of that today because, as you probably heard in the news, the certification or recertification votes started today for a huge number of school districts and education associations around the state. We're not one of them. We were lucky enough to work with the board and our admin teams to get a 2-year negotiated agreement, so that will be us next fall in October when we look toward recertification. So we really look forward to the next year of working together to talk about board policies as we look at what's in the negotiated agreement and we move forward. So thank you on behalf of our association for everything that you did get to this spot and that you'll do from here on. Thanks.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have student representative updates. First from West High. Sorry. We have, is it Zena?
Hi, my name is Zena Maki. I'm one of the school board representatives for West High. And now that we're further in the year, we've started a lot of fundraising events. One of them is our school-wide disaster relief efforts. There are select teachers where there'll be like jars in their classrooms, and we're encouraging students to donate anything they can, because as a giving community, we have a responsibility to give back and help people who lost a lot in like all the disaster events and through the Red Cross. And there's also, and Psyched is hosting their annual diversity dinner, which is an event that is that the counting of the fundraising will be like at to like show how much we've made, and it's an event that's made to bring the community together, especially families who speak different languages, to try to get them into the community and like share foods, and it's really fun. You should come. It's November 2nd. And also there's also Psyched, which is like the organization. We're doing booklet sales, which the funding will also go to like hurricane relief. And there's also the music playathon, which is organized by 3 students, Junhee Lee, Annie Chen, and Lucy Poliak, and that money goes to the music auxiliary. They usually plan that every year, sometimes twice a year, and it's a really popular event. So yeah, that's on November 11th. And there's also the annual West High Fall Fun Festival, which this year will be open to the community. So it's not just for students. Students are encouraged to bring their families because there'll be food trucks, inflatables, and it's going to be really fun. And also Student Senate. We held our first full Senate meeting today, and I'm one of the heads of the task force. So we talked about like issues or things we could do to improve. And one thing that did come up was like the filters on our Chromebook, because I know those are used to filter like stuff, but we've noticed that it has gotten in the way of some of our like academic research, because like for example, like a project we were given in French class, students like who use their own personal computers were able to access more like photos for like advertisements in French, and like yeah, but versus students who use their Chromebooks would get like really outdated pictures, like black and white. And since some students really do depend on these Chromebooks, I feel like it's an unfair like amount of like information some students get over the others. So I don't know, maybe if you can change that in some way, yeah, that'd be awesome. Also, we're also working on a more open dialogue. So right now, task force is trying to figure out a way to get more students' like voices heard. So we're also figuring that out. So far the girls swim team is undefeated, and the academic decathlon has already begun preparing for their competition in January. And also for journalism, West Side Story photographer Allison Keenan is one of 10 finalists in the National News Photo Contest of the year. It was a photograph of 40 students who participated in the sit-in from last year. And also Somalia Thinuara, who's a finalist, or who's going to be recognized by the National Scholastic Press Association as a finalist for her multimedia article over a student who has Rett syndrome. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Tegan from City High.
Good evening. For the new school board members, congratulations on winning your elections. I look forward to working with you if needed. Now, for City High News, I am pleased to report that homecoming was an extreme success. The dance sold over 1,000 tickets, all of which the funding will be going towards various student-centered activities, and a portion of those profits raised will go to various disaster relief agencies in order to help with the variety of disasters that have been occurring as of late. City High's Hear My Voice performed alongside the choir this past weekend as their first excellent performance. Hear My Voice is a program to encourage students to get into the performing arts at City High. On Thursday, 70 freshmen and sophomores will be going to Camp Wapsie for an overnight leadership retreat, which we hope to have plenty of youngsters teach in the way of leadership. City High is as well happy to report a record amount of Job Shadow participants this year. 200 students have been enrolled in the Job Shadow program. And finally for you all tonight, a performance of Charlotte's Web will be taking place on November 3rd to the 5th, put on by the drama department at City High. Thank you to the school board, and again, a congratulations to all the new school board members. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tegan. Next, we have Shane from Liberty High.
Hi, I'm Shane. Nice to meet you. I'm a junior at Liberty High School, and I'm part of the member of Administrative Advisory Board at Liberty. Since Liberty's a new school, we have a couple events this fall going on. We have varsity level competitions between cross-country, volleyball, swimming, and golf, with the added sophomore football that will be going on. All great success in these fields of sports. We have fall theater productions at Liberty, and also some music performances, such as there's a choir concert tomorrow. Do not know where, but as of last week, there was a great choir concert at Liberty High with the new music program. I think they did very well. I was part of that. We have obviously a couple plays going on this fall. Do not know that, but it's okay. They're great. I'm sure they're going to be great. We have our homecoming, Liberty Fall Fest, of the week of October 16th to 20th. It'll be on the 20th, which we'll be holding our fall dance. We're also holding a club fair on Wednesday, October 18th at Liberty. This will allow the students to kind of look at different clubs and different sections they want to be a part of and see what they like. if you like music, if you're more a politician, things like that. This will allow them to be immersed in different groups in their school if they don't know where they are right now. But yeah, that's just a couple of what's going on. I love being at Liberty. It's a great school, a great place. And so thank you, board members, and for helping our community and our service. So you guys have a good day.
Thank you, Shane, and again, thank you to all of our student representatives. I also want to thank the students at Northwest, North Central, and Southeast for providing the new artwork that you see behind the Board of Directors tonight. Next on the agenda, we have community comment. Thank you for your interest in Iowa City Community School District and for your willingness to share your comments. You are reminded to give your name, address, topic on which you would like to speak. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting and shall be limited to 4 minutes per speaker. The initial community comment period shall be limited to 1 hour. Remaining community comment, to the extent necessary, shall take place at the end of the meeting. To the extent you are commenting on items not on our posted agenda, the board may ask follow-up questions of speaker, but it is prohibited by the Iowa Open Meetings Law from responding to questions from speakers or from engaging in substantive discussions regarding non-agenda items. First up, we have Laurel.
Hi, I'm Laurel Fega. I have kids at Kirkwood and Northwest, and I'm concerned about the activity transportation plan for Kirkwood and Alexander area students to their secondary schools. When current secondary boundaries were set, assigning Kirkwood to North Central and Liberty and Alexander to Northwest and West, there were promises made by board members at the time that barriers creating by sending these high FRL schools to faraway schools would be taken care of. I don't have any children at North Central or Liberty yet, but I have been following this situation since the beginning and thinking about what my children and their classmates will need when they go to North Central or Liberty. The current solution the district has come up with is not great. If you don't know about the activity transportation procedures, my understanding is that a student needs to go to a coach or activity sponsor and ask for transportation, and then the request will go up the chain of command, and transportation in a cab will be arranged. The cab will pick up and drop off at one location that could be a couple miles from the student's home. According to board docs, only one student is using this transportation option currently. Here is a list of my issues with the plan and some possible solutions. First, one stop isn't enough. I wouldn't let my kids walk home in the dark from our neighborhood drop-off location, and I think most people in this room probably wouldn't let their kids either. Second, the transportation plan was not communicated before students made decisions about sports and activities. Most teens, if they don't know how they are going to get home, won't even try a club. Third, there should be one person who coordinates all activity transportation for each school, and the process to get transportation should be easy. This person should be checking with students about what they need. Fourth, a lot of kids from Kirkwood participated in sports and activities at Northwest. Some kids need support to continue to be engaged in activities. They don't need more hoops to jump through. Fifth, there needs to be a way for students to attend sports and performances as a spectator. Sixth, there should be a directory that includes info that would be helpful for setting up rides and carpools. Based on the turnover rate at Kirkwood, more than 1/3 of the students who are going to Liberty from the Kirkwood area never even went to Kirkwood. They don't necessarily know who lives around the corner, let alone who they could get a ride from. Seventh, the district should look into if there is a way for students at Liberty or North Central to use the North Liberty commuter bus that is operated by Coralville. I'm sure other people have lots of other great ideas for dealing with transportation. I think the Liberty staff and community have done a great job getting the school up and running, but the reality is Kirkwood doesn't feel included. I want Liberty to be so welcoming that the benefits for Kirkwood kids going to Liberty aren't just about the new building, but about community. We can get there, but part of the solution is a better activity transportation plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next, we have Julie.
Julie Van Dyke. I don't give my address because I've been threatened and harassed. It's going to be a little bit ad lib and ad hoc, as the case may be. In looking over and listening to the information provided on the district's legal advice from Joe Holland, when you hear Craig say things like he had to go back to Kristen Fry for a year and a half after she was gone, keep in mind, Kristen Fry was the lawyer for the school district for over a decade. I think it was like 13 or 15 years. So there are reasons that he has to go back to her. It hasn't just been a couple years. In 2015, I received what I perceived as a very threatening letter from Joe Holland on his letterhead. I assume that was probably to avoid FOIA in some way. And in that letter, he accused me of emailing conflated accusations to law enforcement. He said that what I was doing in that letter to former Chief Hardine was nothing more than attempts to injure the reputations of people. I could spend a lot of time telling you the things that have happened to me in this district since I started speaking out, but we don't have that kind of time. At the time I wrote the letter to Harganine that he was apparently complaining about, I had received an image sent to me of a computer screen that said, you'll know when I F with you, with a picture of a hypodermic needle jammed into the screen like that in a man's hand, who was actually a friend of a current board member at that time. I've been threatened directly by Superintendent Murley on the phone, on a phone call that he made to me that would show on his phone records that he made to my cell phone. He threatened in that phone call twice. He told me he said, I will cause you harm. He said that to me twice. I hung up on him, and I haven't spoken with him on the phone since then. I wonder how many other people have received threatening letters from Joe Holland, parents in the district. And that letter, make no mistake, was to muzzle dissent. Kristen Fry did a great job on some things. And one of the things she did a great job on was fighting the board members and administrators, in my opinion, who were trying to close down community comment and agenda item comments. It's since Kristen Fry left that I would say the district's transparency has plummeted to the point where parents get threatening letters from Joe Holland. I'd love to talk with any of you about this letter, maybe, at length. One of the other things I was afraid of at the time was a current board member who actually had pled guilty to phone harassing someone in the area, which was described as stalking to me by a lawyer that looked at what the charge was, had sat behind me in a meeting here with a shirt on that said, you can't duct tape, it doesn't muffle stupid, or it doesn't stop stupid, but it sure muffles the sound. I'd be happy to show that picture to any of you. I've been threatened, and I wonder how many other people have been threatened. And I want to know why our general funds are going to pay for the district's lawyer to threaten and intimidate outspoken parents in this district. I would look at not only what Joe Holland has done, but I would look at what kind of lawyering he's doing for this district. Is he aggressively going out and intimidating or threatening people who are perceived as speaking against what the administrators might like? That's not what he should be doing. And I think that you need to really, really look at how the lawyering for this district and the cost of it has changed between Kristen Fry and Joe Holland, because it's very, very different. And I invite any of you to get in touch with me, though I will not use your email addresses because Mr. Murley pulls them, and I can show you that letter too.
Thank you, Julie. Next, we have the consent agenda.
Yes, I'd like to pull items 12 and 13, and they can be discussed together as one item.
I move that we approve the consent agenda minus 12 and 13.
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just want to make sure.
Kim,
I'm sorry.
yes.
Didn't want to jump the gun. Online voting is open.
All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Next, we have legal counsel update, and I'm happy to do that for us. We met last night during our board retreat and started a lengthy, thorough discussion that was just a starting point. We're continuing to explore the best practices of not only to meet the request of our current legal counsel to provide some type of evaluation, but it's important from the district standpoint to perform that evaluation, as well as create a policy for future transition when and if that's going to be needed. So right now, we're still in the process of discussing some of our different avenues we can follow through on, and we hope to provide another update at our next board meeting. Does anybody have any other things they want to add, Lori? All right.
The other thing we talked about was developing a transition plan in the event we do want to ever change counsel, either now or when Joe retires. Did you say
I mentioned
I'm sorry.
that,
Yeah. Sorry. And getting that spelled out so that we don't have question about how that process happens when the time comes. So.
Okay. Thanks. Next, we have Appendix 8.
Ruthie and I can talk on that. This Appendix 8 was one of the policies that the Policy and Governance Committee worked on last year, and as I mentioned at the retreat, you'll notice the things that we crossed out that are no longer relevant, or the things in yellow that we added. The last, policies are on a 3-year rotation, so some of this stuff hasn't been updated since 2015. So with that, we never got it back to the previous board, for approval, so that's why it's before you now, is we're looking for approval of those changes.
I move that we approve Appendix 8.
Second.
You have the second?
Janet.
Janet, okay. Online voting is open.
Do we have discussion?
Is there discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to put in a quick thing. I like the way we're defining the chair's responsibilities, and I know previously the chair of the Ed Committee was not the chair of the board, and there were some conflicts there. And I hope that going forward, whoever's the chair of the Ed Committee have autonomy within that committee to run it the way they want and to do things as they wish.
Any other discussion? Okay.
Ready? Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thanks, Kim. Next, we have the transportation update.
And you have quite a few items that are attached to the agenda, and we have a number of administrators who contributed to that. I think normally we would have Joan speak to this as part of that process. She is at a City High cross-country banquet tonight, so I believe Laura and Matt, Laura says no, Matt is going to begin the process.
Sure. So a couple of I think kind of my section of this has probably been my work with the activity busing or transportation service that we're attempting to provide to Alexander and Kirkwood students. So you see some documents on there. Joan provided an update memo on how we tried to attack that process based on some feedback from the previous board, and on the activity or on the transportation committee we facilitated throughout last spring. And through that process, the group really identified the best way to try to communicate that out would be through the adults closest to the kids. And so that was the process we designed, was trying to work through those coaches and directors and club sponsors to communicate that service to the students. Obviously, we don't have a high number of students participating in that service, but you can see from her memo there, we did pull the list. We talked to the students have been trying to follow up that way. Here in the last couple weeks, what we've talked about is trying to do a more widespread communication to families in case there are students that are not participating, that aren't signing up because they either are not aware of the service or maybe are just feeling like they don't know how to navigate that situation from a family end or a student end, because that's some feedback we've received. But I do feel like all of the students that are out for an activity have had that communication. That's what the principals have communicated back. And so I'm happy to take your questions and don't want to belabor the point because there's a lot of documents on there that explain that too.
I know, the speaker tonight, and as well as, we've received some emails from the community, and I think the concern is not that the kids currently in activities are getting activities busing, but kids aren't even getting into the activities because they're not aware of it or weren't aware of it ahead of time, or maybe they just don't like the idea of the whole cab thing. I'd be a little leery putting my kid in a cab instead of on a bus, but I think the concern is that it's not advanced enough on the communication.
Sure, and it's a pilot. It's the first time we've done activity transportation, so I think we're certainly open to that feedback, and we've tried to respond to some of that feedback as we went throughout here, and I think we've identified that same piece, right, in our communication that maybe there's some students that aren't signing up because of that, and, we need to communicate that out more broadly. So I've been working with the principals here the last week or two to make sure that's in their communications, that service is communicated that way. The cab piece was really something we talked, and I think Lori was part of some of those conversations when we talked to the previous board about the summer prep program and how we had started with the cab service, and then once it's a sustainable number, we move it to the bus, just based on numbers, trying to be responsible with instead of running a bus for one or two students, trying to measure what that interest is, and then moving it up to a bus route if we needed to. And we did that for the prep program over the summer, so we were trying to start with that same model here.
So what are some ideas you folks have for casting that broader net and commuting? Because I know, one thing that, at West High, when I worked with a lot of kids who, even with transportation, we really, the participation is still low with a lot of our lower income families and minority kids specifically. So, could this be an opportunity to kind of double down our efforts, not just to get activities buses for the kids, because there's no other transportation, but just to double down and try to get more participation.
Right, and so I think some of that involves the calls that principals put out, the newsletters they put out, we're approaching a new turn of season here, as we head into the winter sports and winter activities, so that'll be a good opportunity for it. Some of our music lists are more probably consistent, and so we felt better about those lists and knowing kids have participated in those activities for a number of times, but those sports do turn over. So I think you're right, Director Clausen. I think there's multiple reasons kids don't participate. Transportation's one barrier that was identified, but there was also several other barriers that were identified when Joan was working with our focus groups last year, and transportation was one of those, but there's a lot of other ones. And so I think there's some other pieces we certainly need to continue to try to recruit, try to share the opportunities with students. And so from a communication channel standpoint, I think it's going back to some of those things and trying to share out broadly what the school activities are for students and to drive up participation, and I think we're constantly trying to do that. But then making sure they know what barriers we can help with and try to help them work around. So,
when those calls go out, and I know principals are recording that and putting it out, but is there thought put out to maybe putting that out in a few languages? A lot of our parents are not speaking English. And if the call goes to them and not the kid, because I know a lot of times kids fall in that where they're translating for their parents. But if the parents are getting a message, do we have any data on that, on where, because I think, we're making some good intentions, but we're not having the impact we want to have. And I'm just wondering, I want to know from the emails we got and then from the, the information here in the board packet, there's some disconnect here somewhere. And I'm wondering what we're doing to kind of drill down and find where that disconnect is.
Right, I think the languages thing is something we can definitely explore. With over 70 different languages in the district. We can't do that for everybody, but we can go to our top 2 or 3 and try to push it out into some of those languages, and we know that's an effort we can do. I think the other piece is I do think part of that disconnect is looking at overall participation and looking at the issue more globally than just through a transportation lens and trying to identify what are those reasons that students aren't participating. So I think, like I said, transportation's one. This is one we're trying to attack right now. We're going to get better at it as we continue throughout the year. But I think there's numerous factors at play there that are contributing to it.
So the language on the phone calls, that you can already do that, right? Because I think we get, I don't remember if it's Twain or Lemming, one of them comes and you get the option to listen to it in English or Spanish.
Yep. Most typically we push them out in English and Spanish.
And the speaker and also in some of the emails we got, providing transportation isn't just for those that are actually participating in the sport, it's also those that want to support their schools and watch and be supportive, that type of thing. Is this something that is also falls under that category, or does that PEP bus, I guess in my time, I'm dating myself by saying that, but are we providing that type of transportation option also for students that just want to watch a game or watch a sport?
No, currently what we've tried to work with is for students actually participating in the activity. The other event that we've had some questions about are school dances or school parties coming up for the junior high students, and we have been actively trying to identify students that have transportation needs for those events. I think North Central's was last week. None of the students they identified from that Kirkwood area needed or wanted transportation to that event, but Northwest, I think, is this week, and so they were in the process of trying to work with those Alexander families to identify who might need transportation so they could get there for the dance or school party activity.
And we've been mainly talking about Kirkwood, but Alexander, are we facing the same problems with Alexander as we are with Kirkwood?
Yeah, I think it's both of those attendance areas. We're working through those issues similarly with both.
And when you identify who you're going to speak to when you go to the students, do you speak to the entire group of students from Kirkwood, regardless of socioeconomic status, or are you choosing certain students to reach out to?
No, we just go with whoever's from that attendance area attending that school.
Make a connection with each student?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you just explain the cab situation? So for the students that live in the Kirkwood zone that may be going to Liberty or North Central, I can't remember which one it is, they have one student using that, right?
Yeah, I believe it's an Alexander student that's taking advantage of that going to Northwest.
And then do they drop them off at a specific location, or does it go to their house?
It is not door-to-door service. So if you look at the memo there, guys, it shows a little bit of where those addresses are identified. Yep. I think it's on the. It's on the memo. Yeah, so it's 2 locations there to provide that. So.
Which memo would that be, Matt? Did you know the number?
I clicked on it and I think I hit the wrong one.
It's the procedures for yellow cab. It's procedures for yellow cab.
It's not the memo, sorry.
It's a document. So,
and given that, particularly in the Kirkwood case, that's clear on the far edge of the Kirkwood zone, is there any, I guess, and maybe you've asked and the students aren't interested, but I'm wondering, are they not interested because they know the drop-off point is so far from their house? Or is it, if there were a drop-off point somewhere more central to the, like even just at Kirkwood, would that be a better fit for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would need Joan to respond to that. She probably knows more of the intricacy of those details, but my sense would be if it was as simple as changing the drop-off, we would have just changed the drop-off zone. If the student was saying they wouldn't want the service because it was too far away from their house, obviously with not a high number of students doing it, it seems like we could navigate that pretty easily. I think we thought with the volume, that we anticipated a higher volume of these requests too, that to speed up being able to identify service for those students and be able to get them on a cab right away, that we wanted to be able to work with the cab companies from 2 locations instead of trying to line up a different address for each one. So that's definitely something we can revisit about. Are those the best locations? Is there something better we can do there that would be more appealing to the students? So
it sounds like you're open to that if that's what the students.
Yeah, I think we're open to
with.
whatever ideas too. I mean, I know we want to make it work. We want as many kids participating. It's in our best interest. It's in the kids' best interest if they're participating. So we're definitely open to any suggestions to try to make it work. I do think it's important for us to remember that, you know, transportation is not the only barrier. It's maybe the one we can try to affect and we can try to impact, but there's a lot of other pieces at play here sometimes that prevent them from being able to participate in activities too. Or I just don't want us to lose sight of that piece. But we'll continue to work on this transportation. I think any suggestions you get or community members concerned, we're happy to talk to them. You know, I think part of our plan is to reconvene that activities. Well, I shouldn't say just activities committee, but it was a transportation committee at the secondary level, and then maybe this is a good time to segue it over to Craig with some of the other busing questions you guys had for tonight. Is we want to reconvene that committee and look at secondary discretionary routes, because we know elementary use attendance support busing now, and I think secondary, it would make sense for us to align those two systems and to look at that the same way secondary, and then to take on, again, this piece of activity. So saying we've tried to implement it now, we're maybe not having the success we'd like to have with it. Here's some of the ideas we've tried to change already for second trimester, and then get some of that boots on the ground perspective from those folks again in a meeting format to see if we can do better in addressing that. So that is also part of our work to reconvene that group this year and take some of that feedback and talk to the advocates and say, as you're communicating this out, what are the hurdles we're running into, and to try to identify and problem solve those.
And as to the activity participation question that JP was focusing on, we got interesting data from Laurel in an email that she sent us, that she went through the yearbook and looked at the 6th graders and 7th graders that had attended Kirkwood and were still within the Kirkwood zone. We're now at Northwest, and those that were involved in, of like 30 students, I think there were 28 or something were involved in an activity. So it's curious to me if the students at North Central from the Kirkwood zone are vastly less involved. I mean, it's a year of transition, it's a new school. She said a third of them never attended Kirkwood Elementary, so maybe they're students with more mobility. I think for myself, I would be interested in just seeing the list of this is what this person said, this is what this person said, just so we can kind of, as a board, we would have that information and we could try and figure out. I mean, I know for myself personally, I would love to see, and I think all the principals would agree with me, more students involved in activities, because the more involved they are, the more engaged. And so if we could see what some of those other barriers are, if it's not just transportation. I mean, some of them are obvious, but I'd like to hear, you know, what the kid says, not our...
Yeah, we could go back to the student survey, you know, we did conduct last year, and, you know, I think it would probably be beneficial for the new board members to see some of that information from, hey, here's the survey we did last year, here's what some of the students identified as barriers at that time. I think we could also, in a way, survey those current students and to find out what activities they're in, because I think we're assuming that just because they're not using transportation, they're not in activities, and I think there's a good number of them that are in activities that just maybe aren't using the transportation, which doesn't mean we still couldn't address transportation for them if we, you know, refine our system in a better way. Maybe their family's problem solving it, and we've heard examples of that where the families just tried to fix it themselves, and the student continues to participate, but it's a burden on the family, right? So we want to remove that. So I think if that's what you'd like us to do, we can certainly go back and talk to Joan breaks down by the attendance area, by students at school, and try to get some data from those students about what is preventing them from participating. Then we can compare that to maybe some of the barrier data we saw last spring and see, you know, have they identified different barriers now? Are we still working against the same barriers? We're trying to address the transportation one. Are there any of those other ones we can attack as well?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, and I think, too, the community member brought up carpooling. If there's any way we can kind of help coordinate parents to know that there might be students that they live nearby or on their way they could share rides with, that type of a thing, trying to help with that. That could also be on the coach level, that type of a deal. And also, when I was speaking to the ACE instructor at City High, he was talking about getting a chauffeur's license to be able to take his students in one of our smaller transit vehicles to job sites and things like that. Is that something we should, you know, look and see if coaches with the chauffeur's license would have the ability to drop students off, or some possibility with that?
Maybe the HR director wants to respond to that question. I think there's significant liability in our own staff transporting students. We do put our staff through a driver's training if they have the potential to doing that. But I think there are different opportunities we could potentially look at for that. I know smaller districts have to pursue some of those opportunities. In those cases, a specialized class, like you're mentioning there, Phil, that does a lot of different job sites and locations, that may be a solution. But I don't think a coach is probably a consistent solution. The one thing I would say is I know our coaches are already doing this informally, and even though I say that liability concern, that's the answer they get from our team. Okay. Our coaches and our directors and our sponsors they're always going out of their way to make sure that kids have rides home and that nobody's left behind and those types of things. So definitely kudos to those folks, but I think it's on us to find a more consistent solution for our families in that too.
Just curious, given the community input and I guess the importance of reconvening the transportation committee, getting your ideas together, when might we expect, Matt, to see an update from that work, just so that we keep the ball moving and we can be transparent with what you've learned and additional input and what ideas you're going to put forward next? Yeah,
the new trimester starts there in the middle of November, so I would think by winter break we could come back with an update about how we started with the second trimester. I think we could reasonably have held a meeting of that group by that time, and then share out with you kind of those new learnings and new things we're trying to do to get that started. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity for some feedback from folks too, if we are missing the mark or if things are going better, that we can share out at that point too.
I got two quick questions that are kind of based around the same thing. I'm a North Liberty resident, and I was very sad to see that they stopped their pilot bus program, their commuter bus, and they did it right about the time Liberty opened, and the bus route wasn't going that way anyway. So one question is there a way to work with the municipalities to try and make sure that we can take advantage of some sort of public transit? I know they're looking at starting a bus route back up in North Liberty, but they have a whole committee, and I don't know if, as a district, we can weigh in on some of that to help with that. And the other question I have is a very specific thing to Liberty, because we don't have a home football stadium. All the games are elsewhere. Is the logistics, do kids have to get to Liberty and then they get on a bus there to go play their football game at West High? And if so, how do they get to Liberty in the first place? Is that where activity busing is coming into play?
Would you be speaking about events that aren't on school days, Sean, or? Well, I guess I didn't.
I know that the Liberty football games are kind of all over the place because they're sort of getting squeezed in wherever they are, and they're not there. So kids have to get from wherever they're at either to Liberty and then on a bus, or they get directly to West, and they're kind of. I just don't know logistically how that's working out. How they do it.
Scott's still back there.
He wasn't.
No, he's not. Yeah, my guess is yes. We're asking them to get to Liberty High School, and then we're transporting them to the location. So I think the central location is to meet at Liberty High School, and then we're traveling together to that site to participate.
Would there be then an activities bus to get them to Liberty for that then?
For all students?
Well, whoever would need to get there. I mean, anybody that's too far away to be walking or something.
I don't think we have that designed currently, no.
So transitioning a bit, I heard you say the discretionary busing at the secondary level is something that the committee would look at?
Yeah, I think that's, and that was part of our takeaway from last year, is we knew we would need to consider that for this year. It got too late into the school year last year to make substantive changes to the bus routes for this year, but knowing that kind of the model we had moved to at the elementary was something we needed to consider secondary-wise, and instead of operating in two different worlds, we needed to sync those up and look at attendance support busing. And obviously there'd be some overlap with current discretionary routes and attendance support, but I think we heard that was kind of the mission, of the work, is to do that. And so we need to go back and look at those routes and present you guys then with a proposal of a potential switch.
So, Pat, you're thinking that we could get another update at the first meeting in December or the last one in November?
Yeah, I think the first meeting in December would be reasonable.
Are there any additional questions?
I'm just going to draw attention to the fact that there's a memo and a chart there on general transportation, and if you had any questions about that, Craig would be, or Esme would be happy to answer those for you.
Any questions for that? Okay. Next, we have the financial health report. And Craig?
Knowing that Director Hemingway wants to keep the meeting short, I'll just open it up for the board. And if you have any questions in general, the way I would read the financial health report is I would turn to the color-coded page where you have a summary of all of the financial health ratios. Everything, quite honestly, is in pretty good shape. We have a good cash balance. We have an unspent balance that exceeds the superintendent's 5% threshold, but it's not quite up where it needs to be what I could consider a very healthy unspent balance. And unfortunately, we're in the year where we've opened up Liberty High School, and I'm anticipating quite a drain on that savings account, so to speak, as we end fiscal year 18. So I'm just preparing you now for the bad news I'm going to share with you this time next year. But right now, it's looking very, the financial health of the school district is very solid. The next thing I would do is I would look at the executive summary page, and that'll keep you from having to read the rest of the report, because I basically go through what I felt were the highlights of the financial year for your review. One of the major concerns that I continue to have is that this district, because we're a people-driven organization, the percent of our budget that is contributed to salaries and benefits is really on the high side. And especially when you stop and think about the fact that we don't employ bus drivers as a percentage of that. We have a contracted service, and so they don't show up in salaries and benefits. So while I understand that we're a people-driven business, it's getting to the point at 84% where we really need to be mindful of our employee expenditures in general. And what happens when you get up to that 84, 85% is that you start taking resources away from the other parts of the budget that need them as well. I mean, for instance, utilities, there's not much you're going to do with that, right? You pay those bills. And as much as we do with energy savings and so forth, we're really weather dependent here in Iowa. And so, and then we have AEA services, and we have no flexibility over that. We send them the $6 million regardless of what kind of financial shape we're in. So the other parts of the budget really get clamped down. And so I just bring that to your attention as a pinch point. That's my biggest concern for our district at this point in time. And but otherwise, I think it's in very, very good shape. Any questions you might have?
I have a question, and you hit on it around the unspent balance ratio, and I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the warning about this time next year. However, you note in the report that there's no corrective action needed at this time. I'm just curious, knowing that we're beneath that target, what could we be doing? Should we be doing? Do we need to wait to get through this year to start those corrective actions? Can we be proactive? And I'm just learning, too, and what kinds of things might be put into place to address that.
That's a great question. The only way to affect your unspent balance and your total spending authority is something that we have a control over, and that would be the expenditure side of the equation. And it would be simply spend less than we take in. And we've been able to do that for 3 years in a row. We went through a rather difficult fiscal 15 year. I don't know if you were watching all of that play out and as a community member at that time, but the board really struggled with budget cutting about $3.6 million, and it wasn't a very fun process. But once we right-sized the budget, we've been really able to sustain that for the last 3 years, and that's been a really solid process for us. We've known all along that we become more inefficient when we open up Liberty. It's a massive undertaking to open up a new high school, and we have lots and lots of staff that need to be in that building, and for a while we'll be a little less efficient than we were when all the kids were over at West and City, and that's just natural. And so we're going to recover some of that from a school budget review committee, and we have that plugged into our projection model, but still we're projecting that our unspent balance is going to go down. And I'll share that with you as the fall matures. We'll get into that projection process. In fact, in 2 weeks, we get our budget uploaded into our software where we can check out our line item budget and things like that. And so you'll become a part of that process as we move through into January, February, March when we certify our budget. So.
Maybe just a quick note, and this would be about 6 years ago, I think it was. Craig, you can correct me here, but the board had a pretty extensive discussion about unspent balance and really set for us 5% as a minimum and no more than 10%. And in particular, they challenged Craig and I to see what we could do at that point in time. If you look at the chart, you go back to 2013, 2014, you look at those numbers, obviously well under that. And knowing that we were going to open Liberty, that was one of the challenges that they set for us, was to get north of 5% so that we would have this ability to absorb the opening of Liberty. Matt would tell you, if Scott was still here, he would tell you that we knew there'd be some staffing inefficiencies as we came up to speed and got full-size cohorts in for all the schools, and we needed a mechanism that we could use to absorb that as we went through the growth process. So if you look at that chart, we were very deliberate about growing that in preparation for this year, knowing that it would then dip after that. But again, that idea of trying to keep it between 5 and 10.
So if we drop down below because of Liberty opening, are we going to have another tough fiscal year 2015 to try and get us back on track next year and the year after that? I mean, we're going to have to really make some nasty decisions that nobody wants to do.
I hope not. We recognize that we're going to dip into our savings account a little bit, and we always knew that was going to be the case. We tried to manage it the very best that we could, given the resources that the state provides us, right? Given what our growth is this year, if our enrollment comes in strong, if the state were to step up to the plate and give us a little bit of allowable growth this year, that's going to make all the difference in the world. So I can't really answer your question now because there's too many unknowns, but we will be spending more than our reoccurring revenue in fiscal 18, but we've always acknowledged that we would.
And maybe one thing to look at is you look at that chart and you think about some of the process corrections that we made in order to restore the fund balance. So if you think about a reset, if you think about the fact that we're going to see a dip next year, if we can continue to maintain the process changes that we have, we know that we will be on an upward trajectory moving forward in years after that. And Craig and I have looked at that with the idea that that allows us to reset but then recover without having to go through those kinds of painful budget reductions that we did when the state zeroed out our supplemental state aid a few years ago. So we have that built into the process. We anticipate be south of 5%, but then we'll have a recovery period and again be north of 5%.
I think we just need to be really mindful of how we approach fiscal 19. We just need to be mindful of where we are from a financial position and opening up Liberty High School. It's a real unique opportunity for a school district. But we'll have to make sure that we have the resources to cover any staff replacements that we would recommend to you, or any other expenditures, like even we talked about attendance support busing and things like that. Are there areas that we can save? Possibly looking at the committee on discretionary busing, and then reorganizing that for attendance support busing and maybe save some dollars there. All those things are in play in the budget process. We need to look very carefully at them. So.
Great. And could you just explain a little bit what the ICE cap is? And I'm glad we've never used it, but what would be the circumstance where we might need to?
When a school district has a very low cash balance, what happens is that they cut off our state aid on June 15th, and we don't get another state aid check until October 15th. So there's actually a 90-day period of time there where there's no revenue coming into the school district. All your tax distributions have been made in October and April, and so there's no money flowing into the school district. And if you think about it, that's when we spend all our money, because we're preparing for the year ahead. We bring in all of our supplies, we're stocking our classrooms, we have large bills to pay, and salaries continue to be paid during the summer on our contracts. And so lots of outflow, no inflow. So you have to have a really large cash balance in order for you to maintain that. And if you look at the days net cash ratio, you'll see how much we spend every day of the year, okay? And it's a considerable chunk of change. And so as those days go by, we need the cash balance to cash flow ourselves. A lot of districts don't have that, and so they have to borrow money on a short-term basis. And when you borrow money, you pay interest, and that interest comes out of the general fund, which you trade it off for the educational program. So we've always maintained a really robust cash reserve here in this district. We have a good cash balance. We don't have to borrow money, and so that's why ICECAP, it's the Iowa Schools Cash Anticipation Program, is the acronym that it stands for, and it's how we borrow money on a short-term basis. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Craig, I was just going to mention that you will recall last year, well, actually it was earlier this year when we were looking at the certified budget, that I requested that the board have more involvement in kind of the earlier stage of budgeting. So I just wanted to convey that I still have interest in doing that. And I think we talked about maybe October as being the timing for that. Can you remind me when that would be helpful for you?
Yes, like I mentioned before, we're having our fiscal 17 data uploaded into our budgeting software in 2 weeks, and then we'll be able to start generating our reports for 18 and making sure that they're correct, and then projecting out the next 5 years. And so I plan to get you involved in that process as soon after that as we can. It'll probably be the first part of November now.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions?
Can you just describe a little bit on the unspent balance what the unrestricted versus total is? I understand what the meanings are, but what comes into the two different sets of funds?
When you get your audit report in December, I think it's note 16, at least it was last year unless we add one or take one away, but it'll list all the categorical funds that we have that come into the school district. Like the teacher leadership program is a really large categorical fund, and it's millions of dollars. Well, we can only spend those dollars for that purpose. And so there's some of those monies that we receive during the fiscal year that carry over as a part of the unspent balance. What we need to do is identify that amount and remove it from the unspent balance so that you know exactly what you have for unspent balance that's spendable on the things that you might want to spend it on, okay? And so we give you those two figures. We give you the total, and then we give you the restricted would be just an accumulation of all your categorical funds. You subtract that off of that total, and then that's the unrestricted unspent balance, right?
Thank you, Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have the certified annual reports also.
This is really just an FYI for you. We file this September 15th of every year. It's required by the Department of Education. It's extensively used to compare school districts across the state. All this data is uploaded in various ways by different organizations and used for lots of purposes. But this is just an FYI compliance report. We felt, we do this every year, that it's important for you to see. We select, some of the most important pieces of information. We compare them with the year before, and we just provide you this background and this information. It's really nothing you need to do with it or even know about it, but it's just one of those compliance reports that we do.
Thank you, Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Next, the limited English program request for modified supplemental amounts.
I can just give you a brief background on that. Of course, this is something very routine for us. We have a very we spend a lot more in providing our English language support program than is provided by the categorical funds that receive for this program. But the state has allowed us a mechanism to recover that so that we don't have to trade that off with the regular education program, much like special education. So when we incur more expenditures than revenue, we go to the SBRC, we ask them for the spending authority to recover these dollars, and then we backfill that with a cash reserve, which is a property tax, and that's something that you consider during our certified budget process in the March-April timeframe when you see that final document. So this is routine for us. We do this every year. It needs to be approved by you. It's then submitted to the Department of Education and through their SBRC process.
Thank you. Your motion?
To approve the resolution to approve the request for modified supplemental amounts for excess LEP costs for the 2016-17 school year in the amount of $1,201,883.92.
Second.
Phil. Is there any discussion?
So as I was looking at the document that you submitted to the state, I see that really we use that money for instruction and a tiny bit for transportation. I've been hearing from the community that there's a need for more support services for families of ELL students. Could we expand those services and put it in this silo?
I would need to know exactly what type of service is being requested, and then we can certainly consider that, absolutely.
Okay.
If
I think
it
some
qualifies
discussions
or-
maybe have been had.
In terms of staffing or?
Staffing, interpreting needs. I had heard that a discussion was had with Kingsley about this.
There may be, and that may be a conversation that's taking place as we're looking at future services moving forward. As Craig said, there's quite a few restrictions on what we can put into that application for relief, and so when we know exactly what those are, we can see if they fit in those categories.
Okay.
We just need to clarify, and Leslie wants to just point out.
You'll see on the grid that transportation of about 61,000 is included, but if you look at the computation below, it is backed out because you cannot claim transportation costs in your SBRC application. And that's one of the things that we transitioned our ELL programs over the last couple of years to offer more buildings, because we were using transportation costs to get those students where they could be served, and we didn't have that ability to recover. So now we have staff spending more time with them in the buildings, which in most cases are their home buildings. There's still a little bit of transportation.
Because we can pay for instruction, but we can't pay for transportation. And so to unburden the general fund, it made a lot of sense to hire ELL teachers and put them right in the buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in our cover, there were 4 FTE added this last year in the information that we provided you this time around, and I think we still have some work to do. I think there's still some buildings. I know Amy could probably address this, but I think there's still a few buildings that we need to do that with.
So we could potentially create some new positions for support for ELL families, and it could potentially fall into the silo and not be a general fund expense?
That's correct. Absolutely.
And so we do have the ability to increase what we can.
If we pay for legitimate expenditures like in instruction and things like that, but we couldn't transport kids between buildings and qualify. Right.
Clear on that, absolutely. Yeah. So, but we do. We've got an upper end yet to go with this.
Actually, it's unlimited.
Right.
If you really want to know. Yeah. There's not a cap on it.
No.
Yeah.
What would be the process that we could use to identify how to better serve those families?
I'll have to let the curriculum people speak to that. That's out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
And then one other thing, just as a reminder to the current board members, and just maybe a reminder to the new ones too, the 4th legislative priority that we have this year is more support for English language learner students from the state. So it's on. We've been discussing that too.
just remember, this is a property tax, so there's a bit of a trade-off there with your stakeholders as well, as you consider expanding the program. It will require a larger property tax payment from our taxpayers.
Any other discussion? Kim?
I think they were going to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I first appreciate your comments, Lori. Want to understand more about the needs that you're hearing that are going unmet. The one thing I can speak to is that all of our secondary buildings have ELL programming, including Liberty High School. 16 of our 20 buildings, we continue to expand the programming at the elementary level, have ELL teachers or programming available. The reason the other 4 don't, or we've been holding off, is just that our N at those buildings isn't very large, and so we continue to bus from those 4 buildings to a site that's closer. So we definitely would be going to ask for more FTE if those numbers grow. I think in the back of our minds, we've kind of set a soft goal or target at by the time that we've got a lot of attendance zones changing in 2019 for our elementary folks, that we would try to have all 4 of those other buildings make ELL programming available. So I'm not sure if you're talking about FTE, if you're talking about things like translators and language line, because we certainly make those available to our buildings, both of those opportunities. But if there's other unmet needs, I'm sure we can look at those as well.
Yeah, maybe we can just chat about that. I've heard some conversation that that there's really just paras and there's teachers, and there aren't any specialized ELL support persons in the district, and that would be a new position that has been identified. I've heard from the community that is needed. So perhaps we just need to discuss that further.
Certainly.
Ready to vote? Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next, we have the summary of Appendix 9. Dwayne, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. And we have 5 projects to discuss this evening, and I would like to take one of these out of order, and that would be the presentation of the new elementary school in North Liberty, if you don't mind. The architects are here. So I'll start this discussion by telling you that the committee that worked on this design included Christy Hefner, the principal at Penn, Nick Proud, the principal at Garner, Eric Ewald, the principal of Van Allen, and also Amy Courtmeyer and Craig Hansel, who's also assisted me here.
I am. I'm bothering you. Actually.
That's all right. And let's start this up. Oop. As well as Matt Hartman, who's a 6th grade teacher at Van Allen, Kristen Baumgart, who's a kindergarten teacher and a parent, as well as Matt, and Marge Hartman, a librarian at Penn. So it was a pretty good committee, and that was the committee that worked on the schematic design. There was a larger committee a while back that selected, before most of you came on board, the architect firm itself, and the firm that was selected was FRK, Freeman Ramsey Covis. And they have done a lot of schoolwork in Iowa, probably as much as anybody. They've done a lot of the schools in Waukee, Johnston, and a number of other places. So they've got a pretty good reputation, do a lot of projects. The architect that's in the committee, I will say this, and Amy, you can chime in, we really wanted to do something different. You know, we've had a lot of plans that kind of get repetitive in Iowa City, so we wanted to come up with a different plan on a different site typically than most sites. So we ended up with FRK. We're pleased we did. And this evening, the architect that's going to present the information on the plan to you is Vasil Petrov. He's an excellent architect, and I'll turn it over to him. And I think you just use the mouse the way you normally would.
Thank you, Dwayne. Well, hi everybody. Well, this will be a good test for my public speaking skills. Can you hear me well? Well, please allow me first and foremost to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to design the new school in North Liberty. And also, I would like to thank the committee Dwayne mentioned, the committee which helped us not only understand the building program, but also guided us through how to tweak it and to make it more forward-looking and make a difference in North Liberty. Well, let's get started. Let's start with the site. We have about 21 acres site located in the northeast quadrant of North Liberty. The Google Earth image in the middle of the screen gives you a good idea of the site vicinity. There is a residential developed neighborhood to the north. We have North Front Street to the east with a commercial property across. There isn't much on the south side of the lot. You see North Bend Street, which right now does not reach to North Front Street, and as a separate project, it will be extended to meet North Front Street. And on the west side of the property, we have this existing commercial facility. So from view standpoint, the desirable views are to the north, to the west, and to the south. In relative terms, that pre-engineered metal building on the west side is a lower priority from view standpoint again. Now, when we first walked the site or drove past the site, our initial gut feeling was, let's make good use of the site topography. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate with the image on the left-hand side of the screen. That's a site survey representing the topography. The darkest shade areas represent the highest elevation, and the lighter shade represents low elevation. So it's pretty obvious that the southeast corner of the property is the highest point, and then the grades slope gently down, going to the west, and even more so going to the north. Now, North Front Street, the one on the east side, the right-hand side, is also sloping down as we go to the north, but at a slower rate than the site. So by the time we get to the northeast corner of the site, the road is about a good 12 feet above our lot. So that complicates access on the east side. So there is no road on the north. We have this great challenge on the east side. The commercial property, no access on the west side of the site. So we are pretty much restricted on the ingress-egress points along that future North Bend extension along the south. So how did we solve that puzzle? You can see North Bend Drive on the south side. Its extension is not straight to North Front Street as you would have expected. Instead, it curves, and that S-shaped form is driven by the City of North Liberty requirement to meet North Front Street, the intersection, the existing intersection with the driveway to the property to the east. We have several circulation loops, broad picture speaking. The vehicles circulation areas are located in the bottom third of the site. The building itself is centrally located and reserved the north section of the site for playground areas and detention, water detention, stormwater detention areas. The larger loop on the close to the inflection point of that future North Bend Drive curve is the is the parent drop-off. Its location maximizes the length of the curb drop-off. Visitor parking lots and staff parking is surrounded by that drive. The smaller loop on the west side is the service access and the bus drop-off. In our site design, we have to consider one more feature. That's the fire truck access. There is certain code requirement how far a fire apparatus can park. away from a building. That's why we have to provide this additional driveway approach, looping on the west side of the building through the playground areas on the north side. And this is, again, just for, well, as they say in the pre-recorded airplane messages, the unlikely event of fire. We just have to provide emergency fire truck access. The future extension of North Bend Drive leaves a small portion of our site on the south side of the road. We're looking at this area as a potential overflow parking space. Playground areas, there are 3 pairs dedicated to, one is dedicated to the kindergarten, pre-K, the kindergarten wing, and the other 2 for the upper grades. They are strategically located around the building. The 2 darkest green shaded areas, one at the far northeast corner and one at the far southwest corner, are the lowest points on the site, and this is the natural storm detention basin. We'll design it as a what we call dry bottom basin, which unlike a pond. Now, let's move to the building itself. During our meetings with the planning committee, we took away 4 basic concepts. The first is, of course, students come first and foremost. We do the best educational environment we can. Second, follow the site. Be observant of the site features. Don't try to fit or don't try to force a single-story level building or a building that doesn't fit the site. As you notice from the site topography, there is a quite significant drop from the south down to the north. As we scrutinized it, it turned out that it is, while it's significant enough across the entire length of the property, it's not as significant across the depth of a typical elementary school building. So we tried multiple options for the floor plan, starting with a widespread single-story, single-level building, which kind of pushed out the side boundaries, didn't sit right. Then we tried a very compact 2-story version, a classical 2-story version where the first floor is at grade and the second floor is the plus 14 feet. This one didn't fit the site quite well as well. So eventually, step by step, the design evolved into a multi-level building, and that's what you see today. And allow me to walk you through the design, starting at the main entry, which is at the south end of the building, northeast to the top of the screen. The north entry leads you into a secure vestibule. During regular school hours, all traffic, visitors, students, teachers will be routed through that secure vestibule into the administration area, which is the light purple area immediately on the east side. Yep, immediately on the east side of the main entry. From there, you walk into a hallway. To the right, you have the cafeteria, which is at the same elevation as the main entry. To the left. To your right is the administration wing, and immediately adjacent to it is the kindergarten and the pre-K wing. Now, from that point on is where the difference would be compared to a more traditional layout. In a more traditional layout, you would continue walking into a typical 8-foot wide corridor hallway lined up with lockers on both sides. Instead of doing that, we looked at how we can work with the terrain and how we can get away from this traditional confined corridor space. And one more desire that was expressed by the committee was to provide collaboration spaces, which allow for social interaction for the kids. So we took that hallway, and as it expands and leads you further into the building, it opens up. And if you follow the circulation path, there are kind of 2 circulation paths, one going into the building along the east side of the hallway, and the other is on the west side. These 2 paths form a series of terraces or of collaboration spaces that step down as the terrain steps down. So starting at the main entrance, the common hallway, you go past the administration wing. To your left, at the same level, you have the media center, which is the green shaded area. You have a collaboration space at the same elevation in front of the media center, which allows extension of the media center activities. From there, the level gently rises up 4 feet to lead you into the upper level of the educational wing, which is the 2 pods on the north side of the building, the top of the screen. On the left-hand side, a series of ramps takes you down by the music room, then the art room, which is another 7.5 feet lower than the main level, into a collaboration space, which is an extension of the library of the art room. There is the learning stair between the art room collaboration space and the media collaboration space, which is essentially an amphitheater seating, which allows yet another space for open activities and learning opportunities.
Before you go to the next level, maybe, are there any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a couple. The ramps, maybe I'm missing it, but is there an elevator in this?
No, due to the series of ramps, we can avoid providing the elevator.
So it's all ramps, and everything, including the stage that you just talked about, that's all accessible then too?
Correct, yes. All these platforms, all these terraces are interconnected with ramps. And in addition to the ramps, you see the stairs, which are really a way of faster means of communication between the adjacent terraces.
And all the ramps meet the minimum ADA slope, so I mean, they're all the same.
Yeah, how long does a ramp have to be to go to a second level and be ADA?
Well, it depends on the height.
Well, no, I understand, but we're talking a 2-story building, right?
Correct.
So
correct.
to go from the first level to the second level, how long is that ramp?
Well, first of all, the levels aren't on top, really on top. They're levels that work their way down the hill. So it's not like you walk into a true 2-story building like, pick one. Not Tate, but
Hoover.
Hoover. You know, the new Hoover has 2 stories. This one has a series of ramps and levels. So it's what I'm trying to get to. It's a partial change from elevation to elevation.
Right, and I count 45 corners on this building.
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot, and every one adds cost. Could you please go over why you went away from a compact to you said that was inefficient. Could you elaborate on that one? Why you chose to go with the X-wing fighter design?
Well, I haven't thought about this description for the building, but it fits it well.
That's the first thing I saw. And these kids are going to love it. It's Star Wars. But go ahead.
A conventional 2-story building would require a flat building pad, where the first floor is at grade and the second floor is at certain height. After we look at the site, it looks like the grade difference, the grade doesn't slope steep enough to fully accommodate a true multi-level walkout building. Or it's a bit too steep to create a graded path for single-level building. Hence, at that point, we started looking at options where part of the building sits at, relatively speaking, the highest elevation of the site, and the other side of the building slowly steps down following the terrain. This optimizes the amount of earthworks. And to solve the vertical circulation, one of the earlier versions had compact stairs and elevator, but then we found a way to incorporate the stepped collaboration spaces and a series of ramps, which are much, first, less maintenance than the elevator, much safer than stairs, and large changes in elevation. That's how we arrived at that solution.
So I think something that will help too Director Hemingway, he's got another slide that shows you the mass. He's got a future slide here that shows you the mass on the site and how the building fits that. And maybe once you see that, that'll help. Why don't you go ahead?
One more question while you have that part, that specific one up. Can you just, what is the petition or the partition between the gym and the cafeteria? What is that going to be?
That's an operable partition.
Yeah,
which will, right now the floor of the cafeteria is at the main level. The gymnasium is 2.5 feet lower. So with the means of that, by the operable partition between the two, we can open the cafeteria floor to the gym and use the cafeteria floor as a stage during certain events. That's the reasoning behind the operable partition. I'll switch quickly through the other slide just to show you the lower level, which is the walkout, which is purely classroom wing, and a few smaller collaboration spaces, which are more intimate than that central hub that we looked at the previous slide. These collaboration spaces are open to each classroom and allow for better supervision of the kids who are using them. Next slide is probably the best way to explain the change in elevation. If you look at the upper left-hand side image, it's a section cut through the central hub, that series of collaboration spaces. Main entry is at the high point. From there, you go down 2.5 feet. That first recessed platform is the level of the gymnasium and the music room. From there, you go down another 5 feet, which is the level of the art room and the adjacent collaboration space. At the same time, that will be the east side, so to the top of the screen, you see how the main level extends further into the building to a collaboration space approximately in the center of the hub. It sits immediately in front of the library. From there, you go up another 4 feet to go to the upper level for the classroom wings at the north end of the building. And you can see the bridge that links the two upper level of the education, of the classroom pods. The image on the upper right-hand side is the view that you would see standing on the playfields looking into the building, looking up to the south into the collaboration space. In the foreground, behind that curtain wall, you can see the bridge, the elevated bridge connecting the upper pod, the upper level of the educational pod. On the mid-depth, you can see the collaboration stair, that amphitheater-style seating, which connects the collaboration space in front of the art room to the collaboration space in front of the library. The lower two images are what we would refer to as massing. They help us establish the volume of the building as it's extruded up from the floor plan. The view on the left, bottom left, is from the north, so from residential area, and the view from the east, on the right, is view from North Bend Drive. On that view, you can see in the foreground the gymnasium, which is the tallest portion of the building, and the cafeteria facing south, and the support spaces wrapping around the gymnasium corner. In all these options, I have either hidden or made the roof of the hub of that central collaboration spine of the building translucent, so it's easier to read the floor plan. One more important feature, and I'll go back to the floor plan, is the storm shelter.
Yeah, I was going to discuss that.
Okay. Well, then I'll fast forward to the massing study. Again, this gives you the best idea of that central hub, the space, the shared collaboration space from which all major functions of the building radiate and originate from.
So I'll add the comments on budget, and the budget for this project is $18,893,616. I don't know how we got that, but that's what it is. And the latest construction estimate for what you see presented in front of you is $14,858,000. So that's a pretty good place to be in at schematic design. However, as Vasile just mentioned, the city of North Liberty has now adopted the new International Building Code, which requires a storm shelter be built into this school. So we haven't factored that in yet. So that could easily add another $500,000 to the project, but we'll still at this price be under budget. So it's looking pretty decent. And with that, we'll entertain any questions you might have.
2 outside questions for you, Dwayne. With coming in under budget so much right now, would it be possible to look at a playground that is fully accessible and
well, I certainly wouldn't say no, but I'd want to get a little further into the process, but excellent thought, sure.
Okay, and the second question, if you go back to the layout, I guess, of the school in relation to this one.
Yes.
The sidewalk that comes from the neighborhood to the north, I noticed it comes down, and there's a sidewalk that runs along the west side. Nothing that goes into the school. I would assume there's going to be a fence around. Will there be access points in there for?
Absolutely. There's actually 2 bike trails on the property, one on the east side that goes north into the neighborhood around the curve, and then one on the west side that runs north into that neighborhood. And there's already a partial fence over by the plastics factory, but I think we'll want to improve that. So this will be a fenced in site.
Okay. Because obviously one of my concerns would be that most southern playground area is very close to the road there, so just making sure that's all.
It's almost the advantage that we have is that the site actually drops away from the road, so it actually creates a safer environment. It'll be really tough for any child to run out onto that curve because of the elevation change. Not that they couldn't do it, but it actually works to our advantage.
Okay.
So I have a couple questions. Something we've done with our gyms, as you know, whenever possible, we do sharing agreements with the cities. Have
Yes.
we explored doing that with the North Liberty Rec Center or whoever does that?
Well, Craig Hansen and I meet with them on a monthly basis, and we shared some of the preliminary thoughts on the design, and they didn't indicate any interest in doing that on this particular facility. Sorry.
It's just highly unfortunate because this is going to have bleachers. I mean, this is going to be a great facility.
Yeah, well, we're
that they
talking
could
3 or
use.
4 rows of bleachers. We're not really talking tall bleachers.
Yeah, it's better than what we have in some places.
Yeah,
so
well,
many of our gyms are too small for that. So
we would appreciate any political influence to make that happen, but right now it's not going to happen.
well, that's too bad. Secondly, so I know that currently, from an email that I received, that 4 of our elementary schools are using 2 rooms for music. And based on classroom numbers from last year, the enrollment of all of our elementaries were less than what the capacity is going to be of this building.
And I'm on board with that comment, because we have been gradually increasing the size of our music and art rooms to accommodate more children. I think the problem we get into is there's more sections than there are classes during the day.
Exactly.
So in that case, that's why we have a nice multi-purpose room that could be used for that. We built in some bonus rooms.
I'm wondering if, since we are already in schools that are smaller than this, using 2 classrooms for music, possibly also for art, why not just build that in?
We're going to look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think I'll have a conversation with Amy and see what your folks say, and we can go from there.
So it's 100% ADA compliant inside.
It is.
With that, the whole building. And to Paul's question, all of our playgrounds should be accessible. As far as looking at rubberized surface and everything that way, I think that I agree with Paul. That's something we should look at going forward.
Maybe just to add a comment there, that with schematic design, we build in a 10% contingency within that design budget because there are a lot of details that aren't worked out yet. So we still need to work out site details. We need to work out parking lots, sidewalks, playgrounds, all that. So there are a lot of details to come between now and design development that may eat up some of that budget.
And we're also waiting on those life cycle costs for engineered wood fiber as opposed to rubberized surfaces since way back. So on that as well. Yeah, and you know, these collaborative spaces, I guess in my day we just called them hallways, but you know, we use those spaces in our existing schools, and they are just hallways, right? You know,
well, I would point out on behalf of the architects, they got a lot of pressure from the principals in those 3 buildings to include those collaborative spaces.
Sure. Oh,
and if you go to Van Allen or if you go to Garner, if you go to Weber, the new addition at Weber, you're going to see those kind of spaces and how well they use them.
Like I say, I'm just concerned with a compact, multi-story site that had 4 corners would be cheaper to form up and build than a sprawling 45-corner foundation.
But no fun to build.
But what?
No fun to build. I'd build a lot of square boxes.
For public entity.
Excuse me?
It should be functional.
It is functional.
It should be functional, and and also I think, and this is nothing to the architect here, but I think we've missed a tremendous opportunity to build generational buildings. Decide on a plan, standardize it, because then every time you upgrade it, you know the cost going in. We're going to be battling the boards down the road will be battling how to figure this space as compared to the X-Wing next to the Dragonfly, next to the Banana Slug, you know, all the different designs that we have. But.
Thank you. Do you want to, is there any other pieces?
I have some additional items if you're
Okay.
done with this. Are you done with the architect?
Is there any more questions for the architect?
I actually have one around special ed considerations in the school. Like from looking at your template, it looks like you're putting in 2 rooms. I'm just curious, one, and maybe this is a question for others, but how do you calculate the number of students that would require special ed rooms, and is there are there other flexible approaches should that population grow at this elementary school?
Well, you're referring to the template that we started using, and that requires that we provide some what I call half-size classrooms for that particular use that are flexible. It can be used for a lot of different purposes. It can be used for ELL or special ed or, you know, different disabilities. A good example of that is if you've been out to the new Hoover, which I think you have been, there's 4 or 5 small classrooms, so that they will be designed into this project, and they're dispersed throughout the building.
And on the on the traumatic or the storm shelter, the city of Iowa City requires us on those.
Actually, the city of Iowa City, the state came up with a revised code that they wanted every school district or every city to adopt, and Iowa City chose to do their own code. And what Iowa City is requiring, only in new buildings do we build storm shelters, not with any renovation work or additions. I haven't gotten that deep into Liberty, but I think North Liberty accepted the state code, which is a little different. And at Hoover, if you recall, the kindergarten preschool wing had a hardened lid over it, and that's a storm shelter. And you need to have like 5 square feet per student to meet the code. So we still haven't designed that into this yet. We have to figure out where the best place for it is.
Okay. And but North Liberty is going to require this. Coralville, do they? I'm just curious what municipalities are requiring it, because I know the Hills community has no traumatic shelter in the whole town.
I don't know about the other communities yet. I just know of the 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Pedro. Okay, so we also have a step 3, 4, and 5, and 6 for West High, a temporary kitchen. We're designing, and a little explanation there, we're designing or improving the culinary arts lab at West High, and this is to fit in with our phasing plan because we need to remodel the kitchen and cafeteria areas in this building. We can't do it just in the summer. So we're going to have this room ready so that we can move the kitchen facility into the culinary arts room during the spring, during the spring break until the end of school next spring. And the culinary arts and the family consumer science program worked with us, and they've designed their curriculum this year so they could be out of that room. So it's a win-win for the renovation. It's a win-win for the students because they get a nice first-class culinary arts lab. So that's what this project is. And we compacted the design, as I alluded to last night, because it's a simple design. It's a one room. I did bring it with me if anybody wants to look at it. So that's why we're requesting that. And that's steps 3, 4, and 5, and step 6 is the notice of public hearing. We just discussed the Front Street School, Lucas Elementary School renovation. We had a change request, step 8, for actual deduct change of $3,866. We added some roof drain insulation. We added 2 countertops, but we also subtracted some chain link fence, so it netted out as a $3,800 deduct. At West High School, we had to add a fireproof access panel between a lot of the restrooms. There's a mechanical chase space. We had to have access to it, and the fire department wanted us to put a fireproof door there to keep fire from going from one floor to the next through this chase. That's a $442 ad. And also at West High School on the addition and renovation project, we had the fire marshal request we put an additional exit in during construction to let students get out of the auxiliary gym because some of the exits were blocked. We also added some additional fire extinguishers, and we had some unforeseen. We had to repair the chiller that's there. We just didn't think it was going to make it for another year or two, so we did some repair work on that. We had to upgrade some sizes, and we also had to move a gas line that we hadn't located. So with that, I'd answer any questions you might have.
Just one quick question. The Templex that's being used there?
Actually, the temporary kitchen's listed under transitional housing because it's a cost associated with moving programs and students, not unlike a temporary classroom. We felt that this met that criteria as a temporary space, but in the end, it becomes a nice permanent space.
Is there a motion?
I move we approve Appendix 9 request as listed.
Second. Any discussion? Kim?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we have items withdrawn from the consent agenda.
Yes, and on these, I just would like, on 12 and 13, we can address these at the same time. We've done a lot of modular movings and things like this. Did we forget to bid the fire alarms and all that in these two, or why is it that this is coming up on these and we?
Well, we've done it different ways. We've had our staff do it. We've had a company called Tri-City, which does a lot of our fire alarm wiring. There's been different companies in the area that do that work. This was not in their original contract because it really wasn't in their wheelhouse. But because the district was extremely busy this past summer, we knew we had to get them approved before school started, so they offered up their use of their electrician. It was an additional cost that wasn't in the original scope.
I move that we approve Alexander Elementary and Hills Elementary modular unit projects.
Is there a second?
Change request.
Any further discussion? Kim?
Was the second Phil? Thank you.
Second.
Phil?
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Next, we have agenda setting for our October 24th board meeting.
Well, go ahead, Phil.
This would be the third time I've tried to get the field use discussion on using of our athletic fields after school hours, that type of thing. If we could just have there was an incident and some community members had some concerns about that. I'd like to have that placed on the agenda if we could. Also, I've been approached by both the Democrat and the Republican Party to secure caucus sites, and I'd like to have a discussion with staff on utilization of our buildings for caucuses, that as well. And there's been some email traffic and discussions about substitute teachers and something like that. That could be a parking lot issue, but getting a discussion on subs and things of that nature at some time. Some schools would be interested in the discussion on a more permanent sub situation.
Could that discussion go along with the enrollment report? When that's, I think that's in November, maybe?
Not
the report that we get in November. What's that?
Did you have a class size update in November?
Okay, class size update.
Can it go with that?
I think we can cover it whenever you'd like to. We can talk about substitute teachers.
Would that be all right, Phil?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because in addition to the regular agenda, there will be a work session that night too.
I just have a couple things, and maybe they're not about these two meetings, and Steve might be able to help me out with this. But yesterday at our retreat, when we talked about our committee meetings, so I went back and looked. Our education committee met pretty much every month, and it was on the off Tuesday. Without having chairperson named, I think it would be right for Lori and Ruthina to take that first one on, at least to set that up with topics.
Until we get a chair named?
Right.
Yes.
My other question, I guess, I also look back at policy and governance. We had our first meeting last year on October 4th already. And I was just curious, without a chair on that as well, if the other members or the board would be willing to let me go ahead and set that first meeting agenda and work with them on times to meet that, since I was on it last year. Or I can work with the other two. I mean, I think it's just we have a lot of policies that we got to cover this year and to get going on that.
I don't have a problem with that. Just gonna put him going ahead and setting that.
Yeah, there's already some stuff on there, like the fraternization and conflict of interest. So, yeah, we need to get working on those.
Okay.
We can set that. Anything else for the board meeting on the 24th? And there is a work session, as I mentioned, scheduled for the 24th as well, where we'll discuss an acceleration scenario, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to?
Motion that we adjourn?
Favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
You called on me. I was reading my email and I'm like, I'm that student in class. It's not me.